I'm someone who came from a small town in Minnesota and showed up at MIT in the fall of 1968 on Friday the 13th, aptly enough. And by the following spring, although I'd gotten an 800 on my math SAT, my freshman math evaluation said, "We recommend you avoid all future math courses," which is a transformation of the wrong kind, you know? And I managed to graduate, but in such a chaotic way, sort of like an asteroid hurtling through and banging off of things, that one of my dorm mates actually said that if I got a degree from MIT, it devalued his. So, and needless to say, I did not go on to grad school, but I will be speaking to you based on the scientific education really that I got in grade school and high school, and something about what I learned about how to think about science, but not because I think I know anything that exceeds what actual scientists know. And I have ended up making a career out of, as you'll hear, a very brief version. I wish I had 2 hours, but we don't. Yes, I know. Thank you, Zach. He's a strong-minded man. My assigned title was this, which is my common generic title, but as I've listened today, the presentation is turned inside out and upside down. Oh, what is this? I do not need to go on the Wi-Fi, thank you. No, I'll just, I will just go off Wi-Fi. Turn it off. All right, there we go. So the title is hereby edited because I assert, and I mean this rigorously, for those of you who know Thomas Kuhn's work on paradigms, I assert that it is time to reassess our paradigm of patient. That's my doctor, the famous to many people, Danny Sands in the background, and that's a book that we co-authored. It does not say patients know everything or anything of the sort. It says let patients help. And I will make the case for you that there are many realistic, evidence-based ways in which it truly is time to rethink the role of the patient in medicine. I was a marketing guy, by the way, before I got sick. So when I learned about the e-patient movement, a word that I'll explain, I took on the handle e-patient Dave, and when Twitter came along, I know about consistent branding, so my blog name became my Twitter name, it's my Facebook name, my website, of course, is epatientdave.com. If you need to ask my Skype ID, go talk to a marketing expert, okay? Curing stage 4 kidney cancer is challenging, a consistent brand name in social media is not. I've worked in high-tech marketing. Everyone's talking about disruption. If you want to talk about an industry that got disrupted, I used to be one of the world's best marketing people in the industry that made typesetting machines, okay? And now y'all got fonts, and nobody needs typesetting machines anymore. And the fundamental thing that changed is a core asset of my industry got out into your hands. Now, the first thing that happened was y'all did stupid things with the fonts. You did ransom note typesetting. You had 20 fonts in the computer, so you used them all at once and so on. But over time, the people who were clueless got a clue, and the apps got easier to use. So today, experienced people don't do so many dumb things, and everything works better with more distributed power. There are analogies here to what's happening. I'm a data geek. I do horrible things with Excel. You should have seen when I had to go insurance shopping after the Cobra on my last day job ended. It was scenarios and everything. Anyway, I like data is all I can say. In 2007, as you'll hear, I discovered I was almost dead. I'm not kidding, and got better in less than a year. Hallelujah for damn good medicine, I tell you. And in 2008, I learned about this e-patient movement, and people started asking me in 2009 to give speeches, of all things. I've now done almost 500 speeches in 15 countries, speeches in policy meetings. Something is changing. It was never my idea for me to do this, but honestly, as scientifically minded as I am, this is the first time in my life that I have felt that I have a calling, truly a reason why I came back from almost dying. And I don't even know what I mean by that, but it's how I feel about it. It keeps me humble because I know that, I don't know as much as most of you guys do, you know. In 2010, I started doing it, and in 2011, I did a TED Talk in the Netherlands. It became international. I am also a child of the 60s and a culture change agent by my own definition. Culture, in my view, is our set of shared assumptions about what's appropriate and who is capable of what. I lived through the women's movement going through Boston in the 60s. All of the clumsiness of deciding, well, okay, if I'm not leading and she's not following, what do? We stepped on each other's toes. We had collisions at doors. Am I supposed to open it or not? There are parallels in what's happening in the evolving doctor-patient relationship. So for me, as a student of the culture change, it was a big deal when NBME, the National Board of Medical Examiners, invited me to speak at their 100th annual meeting. And as Zach knows, when I prepare for a speech, I obsess about the culture of the audience. One of the things I learned, I asked Don Melnick, the president of the NBME, what kinds of things they do. I'm sure those of you who have taken these exams will recognize this. This is a now expired sample question, okay? 32-year-old woman presents with progressive renal failure and all this, and I learned that all 10 of these possible answers in this multiple choice are perversely chosen to be trick answers. So you really, really, really got to know all these things. So that's not me, that's my doctor. Okay, so I'm being humble here because I'm going to say some controversial things later on. Now, rogue therapeutics. What do we mean by rogue therapeutics? Okay, I watched Zach's intro video on the conference website, and he says at the end, go rogue, and I'm thinking, Palin, no. Okay, so what do we mean by rogue? So I know, I asked Google, and what did I find on Google Images? Right? Trust no one. Right? And then all further down on the page, Ben Franklin says it's our responsibility to question authority, right? And then there are rogue doctors. Some of you may recognize this couple as of 42 years ago. That happens to be Peter Frischoff, who went on to found Medscape, and his wife, Dr. Catherine Rice. 22 years later, although they were rogues and against the AMA, they founded Medscape. For those of you who are business people, you are about to observe the proverbial hockey stick business plan. That actually happened, where all of a sudden their traffic boomed up, and here they are now, 42 years later. See, and this is really important, I turned 66 this year, okay? And I do not feel like what I thought 66 was going to feel like, all right? If you live long enough, things change. All right? This is the good news and it's the bad news. When I came out of college in 1972, it was still true that you could learn a profession and be set for life. Okay? A friend worked for IBM in upstate New York, and when IBM had its first layoff ever, one of his neighbors went crazy and drove his car through the glass front door because he knew that as long as he kept his nose clean, he was going to have a job for life at IBM. Now, the trick here, all right, in the newspaper industry where I used to work, the Sacramento Bee had a production manager who had this great T-shirt that I've since seen for sale. Age and treachery beats youth and skill every time. So those of you who have accumulated experience can take advantage of this. Did you know this? More than half of all the humans who have ever been 65 are alive today. This is what we call unprecedented. There have never been so many people my age in the world. Now, what are you going to do about that as scientists or innovators or so on? Because this is a huge market. 20 years ago, when my father-in-law started needing a walker, I thought, why do these things look like they were stolen either from an aluminum factory or some last-ditch nursing home? Why doesn't somebody like Rubbermaid get into the business of making things that look attractive? Well, anyway, this is my college classmate, Jay. He's the first man in his family's history to ever reach age 65 because they all died of cardiac things of one sort or another. Twice in the last 10 years, medicine saved him to the point now where he has a pacemaker. And he's not letting any grass grow under his feet. He's going to Jimmy Buffett concerts and everything he ever wanted to do. He's just living in his bucket list. And in fact, Pew published this, I think it was a year and a half ago. This is the so-called population pyramid the year I was born. Each of those is 5-year bands of census data. Last year, here's what it looked like. The population pyramid is becoming a rectangle because medicine is saving so many of us from dying in our 40s and 50s and 60s. It's creating a new world. The dark band is baby boomers. The left side is men. The right side is women. And when I turn 100, 34 years from now, which I have reason to think I will, this is what it looks like. And if you look carefully at the caption, what you'll see, that big brown bar, that's all the baby boomers. They will then all be in the 85 and older range, and 3% of the US population will be women 85 and older. All right, and if you combine that with the left side, the men, about 5% of the US population will be 85-year-olds. So the world is changing. Now, here's the question at the core of every clinical encounter, because I'm going to get into the impact of all this on medicine. Question is, okay, what should we do here? Secondary to that is the diagnostic question. Okay, well, what's going on here? And the deep and sticky one behind that showed up, there was a palpable difference between the first sessions this morning and once the patients got on stage. I don't know if you felt it, but the whole nature of things was different. And this is the sort of the distant rumbling of and you could say an earthquake or a tectonic shift, I don't know, but it was really different, and I see why. Because the deep question behind this is, who's in a position to know what's important? And then you have the sociological question of who has a right to have an opinion, okay? In fact, who's in a position to know anything useful? None of what I will say here is an indictment of the brilliant people who saved my sorry butt in 2007. Something new is possible in addition to everything they do. And I assert that whether you're a clinician or an entrepreneur, if you leave a resource unharvested, then a competitor, academic or business-wise, will have a door open to outperform you. Okay? In addition to the increasingly important patient experience issue of whether I, as a person with a problem, feel like you welcome my contribution to the case. In fact, who even gets to say whether some fact is useful? So these are culturally challenging questions. Now, Thomas Kuhn, I mentioned, he's the guy whose 1962 book popularized the word paradigm. Within a couple of years, he said that he had completely lost control of it. It had become, today it's at the point where if somebody has a new way of ordering pizza, they call it a paradigm shift. But he was strictly cognitive about it. All right, he said that his first book was in 1957 about the Copernican revolution. Did you know that Copernicus wasn't fully accepted? You know, the guy who said maybe the Earth's not the center of the solar system until almost 100 years after he died? So revolutions don't necessarily happen in an instant, but the truth is the truth, whether we know it or not. All right? He followed that up in 1962 with the structure of scientific revolutions. This is not a 1962 book cover. This is the 50th anniversary edition. And he observed that not only that there are scientific revolutions, but that they have a structure across fields, physics, chemistry, astronomy, all kinds of things. This gives us the ability to understand what's happening. That's from the introduction to the 50th edition. And in particular, now there's a word that I will focus on here because it's relevant here. The stages a scientific field goes through, and if you haven't read this book, and if you have an appetite for understanding intellect, all right, and academic thought, it's just terrific. All right? There's normal science, which he said is pretty much puzzle solving. People are going along, and the thing is, everyone in the field agrees what things are worth measuring and paying attention to, and pretty much how things work. Now, there is a stage pre-paradigm before everybody in the field knows what's going on. Before Franklin figured out electricity, he wrote, there were people who felt that people who were fascinated with the attractive and repulsive forces. There were other people who didn't care about that. They just saw that it flowed, so they figured it must be a fluid that they'll be able to put in bottles. And these parties had nothing to talk to each other about. There was no scientific field of electricity. But when all the practitioners agree on what exists, normal science goes along, and everybody agrees, yeah, that's a reasonable experiment to do. Well, and that's the paradigm. But then you do an experiment that everybody agrees is reasonable, and something unexplainable happens. It kind of goes clunk. And that, he said, is called an anomaly. And I assert, and I have a whole separate lecture I do on this, but I assert that every time an engaged patient, an empowered, engaged patient, whether it's Matt Might or any of the others that you heard today, or me, which you'll hear a little of my story, alters the outcome of a case, then that is an anomaly in the paradigm that says to do something useful in medicine, you got to have a medical degree. All right? And that is the rationale by which patients, engaged patients, are often smacked down and told to shut up and do as they're told. All right? And I assert that the presence of those cases means we have a crisis in the medical field that will require us to rethink things. Happily, there's a structure to what's changed. Anyway, then you have crisis and revolution. Woohoo. Importantly, we are raised to believe that medicine, the progression of science rather, is the piling on of additional facts. Why? Because every time there's a revolution, all the old textbooks have to be thrown out. The pre-Copernican astronomy books were of no use, right? And they write the new book saying, and then we realized this, and it all was leading up to this, but that's not really how it happens. An important factor is that when a paradigm changes, when there is a revolution, all the department chairs and authorities in the old model all of a sudden discover that they are experts in a wrong model, and people tend to resist that. Well, a little bit of my history here. 1969, humanity landed on the moon. And a few weeks later was Woodstock. Now, I will tell you, this was a heck of a summer to be 19 years old. In fact, that fall, the Whole Earth Catalog was published, Access to Tools, Hippie Self-Sufficiency book, How to Grow Your Own Food, Build Your Own House, Not Be Dependent on the Man. For historical accuracy and authenticity and full disclosure, here's a picture of me that year. We will come back to that. Well, in fact, you know, some people, observant people, have asked over the years. There's a reason I was interested in this a couple panels back there. See, there's a glass tube coming out of my mouth there. And last year at Exponential Medicine, I disclosed for the first time that at the other end of that glass tube was an Erlenmeyer flask with a thistle tube stuck in it. Now, I got this from the University of Queensland. It's not exactly what was going on in that photo, because at the bottom was not, at the top was not sulfuric acid, it was weed in the thistle tube. And at the bottom was not sodium sulfite, it was bong water, which accounts for Exhibit A. And I myself, Colorado, right, had to beat the volunteers away with a stick. Are you still here? Well, all I can say is in April of 1972, I was wandering through Building 7, the Building 7 lobby at MIT, when I came across this sign, which I have reconstructed to the best of my ability. Yes, I got hired by the US government to smoke dope. In fact, I found out I was the first subject in the US government's pot smoking experiments in the spring of 1972. It was at Boston City Hospital, which did those studies, and I swear, when I found the appointed office at Boston City Hospital, here's what it said on the door. I'm not making this up. The Joint Project. And there is a whole separate lecture on this because it turns out the doctors and professors in the white coats and clipboards did not have domain expertise, and the pipe apparatus that they had cobbled together clogged. And I pulled out the spare screens that I always carried in those days and helped them reconfigure the apparatus. Well, at the same time, actually in 1978, this young doctor, Tom Ferguson, came out of Yale Medical School. He became known as Doc Tom, and he was a true visionary. He coined the term e-patients because he saw that patients enabled by the information available on the internet. He was actually the medical editor of the Whole Earth Catalog's 25th edition in 1994. He saw that internet access would not make us doctors, but would give us information that would alter what we were capable of. He died in 2006, but his followers in 2009 formed the Society for Participatory Medicine, and for some dumb reason elected me and my doctor as co-chairs of this society. So I went from almost dead in 2007 to chairman of a medical society in 2009, which some people have said is the jiu-jitsu approach to cancer. Use the energy of the attacker to propel yourself forward. Well, one of my core principles, and you heard it all through here today, patient is not a third-person word, okay? Your time will come if it hasn't hit your family yet, all right? It all looks different when you're the one with the problem. Trust me on this. I have had people come back months later, and this is why I say this is no indictment of the intellect of people who see things the old way, but it is what's happening. When somebody wants to help save a loved one, and a doctor or researcher or nurse says, "Shut up, we'll do the thinning around here," to quote Quick Draw McGraw, the old cartoon character, it doesn't go down well. Well, here is a very short version of my cancer story. I went in for a routine shoulder x-ray, and Dr. Sands called the next day and said, "Your shoulder will be fine, but there's something in your lung." Incidentally, a tumor had showed up in the shoulder x-ray, and what we soon found out was that I actually had metastases in all these spots. This is a generic poster or picture of the drug from the website, or of the disease from the website of the drug I got, high-dose interleukin-2. I had all those tumors and additional ones, including, if you look at the head again, I had one that erupted from my tongue. I had a kidney cancer metastasis growing in my mouth a few weeks before my treatment started. My median survival, the best available estimate, was 24 weeks. Now, this gets into all kinds of interesting questions about reliability of data. My oncologist correctly, at Beth Israel Deaconess, David McDermott, correctly said there isn't enough good data on patients like you. But I want to know, so I went digging and digging. And I didn't go digging and digging, going rogue, as they say, ignoring the doctors. I would find stuff and bring it to Dr. McDermott and say, "Look, I found this. What do you think?" He is one of the top oncologists in the world on this disease, and he welcomed my involvement. He has since said he wishes he could bottle what I did so more patients would do it, because so many of the patients die, and I should have and didn't. Now, there is no guarantee that if somebody else did exactly what I did, that they would survive, okay? I'm telling you that because it is not valid to assert that good doctors don't need patients' help. All right? You heard this morning, there's an enormous amount more information than any doctor can know. Importantly, Dr. Sands knew of a good online patient community and recommended it to me. There's a longer version of this on my website. They gave me all kinds of specific information about how to find treatments. They even told me 4 doctors in the Boston area who do this, high-dose interleukin-2, and their phone numbers. Now, I assert that this is useful information from the patient's perspective. And Dr. McDermott said, yes, it's all valid. It is to this day not in the medical literature, so you can't say where's the evidence for that, all right? And it never will be. There's never going to be a big enough audience for information about how to cope with high-dose interleukin-2. Well, long story short, immunotherapy, FTW, for the world, as they say, because they never had to cut me open to go after the metastases all through my body. They took out the kidney, that's for sure, and when my femur broke, I needed surgery for that from a pathological fracture, but all the rest of the tumors just shrank, and I love it. Culture change. 3 years later, 4 years later, whatever it was, the BMJ invited me to submit an essay for the print edition on how this happened. I would not have had the gall, the chutzpah, right, to propose to the BMJ, you know what, I think you guys ought to publish this stuff. But once they invited me, I thought, okay, let's see. I could just spout my hippie patient perspective, but you know what? A whole bunch of MDs and researchers and policy people are going to read this. So I said to Dr. McDermott, what would you want other clinicians to know about my case? Consider what he said. You were really sick. I don't know if you could have tolerated enough medicine if you hadn't been so well prepared. He was talking about the side effects. The side effects of this drug sometimes kill people. Now, the standard passive thing to do would be to say, well, if there's anything I need to know, they'll tell me. I hope I survive. Just kind of put on your crash helmet. But I said, okay, how do I prepare? That's what's called being an engaged patient, right? He had no advice. Today they do. They have a booklet on how to cope with side effects of renal cell cancer treatments. At the time, they didn't. I looked at PubMed. There was nothing. Why would there be? Nobody's going to get a grant for that obscure case. I turned to my patient community and got 16 firsthand stories from people who'd been through it, and that's what Dr. McDermott was talking about when he says in his opinion, that helped me survive. At one point, my blood pressure crashed to 50/30. I got capillary leak syndrome. The walls of my capillaries opened up. The fluid ran out. They discontinued the treatment, but by that time I'd had enough. So here's a question for the scientifically minded. How can it be that the most useful information can possibly exist outside of traditional channels? And the reality is that fundamental changes in information flow have altered the possible meaning of the word patient. It is no longer valid that only people with a degree can bring information value to a case. In fact, I assert that social media is like information capillaries to the extent that information is analogous to a nutrient. These are the obscure little pathways by which a nutrient can show up at a place that is not centrally controlled anymore. In fact, the university in the Netherlands, Radboud University, in Nijmegen on the German border, where I did my TED Talk, has this model they've been developing since 2010, where it used to be that all knowledge lived above the health horizon and was transmitted one way to the humble supplicant. Today it's more like health 2.0, a little bit of it going both ways. And the world we're moving into is health 3.0 and beyond, where we're all swimming in a common pond of information. What this model does not show is that we are not all equivalent. All of this is on my website, by the way. I am not a urologist. I'm not an oncologist. I'm not a primary physician. I'm not a nurse practitioner. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm just swimming in the same pond of information, which means I'm capable of things. Well, and now we understand that what's happening here is this network of capillaries brings information to me. In fact, we all have them. And in information theory, this is shifting from a closed system to an open network. Now, how do we decide which information is reliable? Because if you've got nutrients and the point of need, and we've got this artery going in one direction, well, what if it's subject to pollution and weak kidneys, right? Well, somebody this morning said patients have an abundance of information on Google. The question is what the quality of it. True. Few people want to talk about this, but doctors have the same problem with the literature. The question there, too, is the quality. Now, this is not me being the Bob Dylan hippie radical standing outside saying, the times they are changing. No, this is, how about Richard Smith, 25-year editor of the BMJ? Most of what appears in peer-reviewed journals is scientifically weak. All right, that's one miscreant. Well, okay, well, what about Marcia Angel, New England Journal. No longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that's published. And in case you think, well, that was some years ago, things have been cleaned up, here's Richard Horton of The Lancet 1 year ago saying much of the literature, perhaps half, may simply be untrue. Now, I am not saying all science is crap. I'm saying the fact that it's a peer-reviewed article does not mean that it is necessarily reliable, okay? Then there's Ben Goldacre, who has been hunting for years to get at the suppressed research results. He says this is the cancer at the core of evidence-based medicine. And then we have this went around Facebook around Christmas time. Don't confuse your Google search with my medical degree. Well, our response, this had like thousands of likes on Facebook from doctors. Our response is, look, Googling is a sign of being an engaged patient. I want to understand what's going on. A friend told me at lunch last month that back in 1980, she asked a doctor who was palpating her neck, what are you doing? He said, it's none of your business. Well, these attitudes exist. Now, predictably, the empire starts to strike back at all this activated patient stuff, okay? The Belgian government is spending taxpayer money on Google ads. If you Google a symptom in Belgium, you get an ad that says, don't Google it. I'm not kidding. And they had 2 award-winning, very high-quality commercials produced, all right? Husband has an owie. Wife starts Googling. Oh no, a few minutes later he's discovering he's bleeding from the nose and he's got, oh no, there's this woman here whose hair started falling out, and within 90 seconds he's dying. I'm not kidding. And the thing is, the tagline at the end of the commercial said, don't Google it, ask a professional. Our e-patient answer is, who says those are mutually exclusive? How about learn what you can and work with a professional? That's what I do. Well, and then I know I'm out of time, so I'm going to have to wrap up. But I will put the rest of this on my website tonight. This 19-year-old was cured of kidney cancer several years earlier. She started to feel not well. The doctors, who I suspect had knowledge that was several years out of date, with the best of intentions, said stop Googling. They had found a patient society there was actually a new paper that said this disease does come back. They complied. They stopped Googling and she died. And last year, the NHS admitted fault in her death. Who wants to be that person? All it takes is to realize that if you live long enough, things change. You know, and just to show that the world keeps changing, yesterday's USA Today said Google now is getting advice from Mayo and Harvard to improve the quality of their search results. Well, just a comment from Oliver Wendell Holmes, the great physician, right? No more right to all the truth you know than he has to all the medicine in your saddlebags. He should only get so much as is good for him. Well, there you go. Let's see, how can I jump ahead just to the end? Let's see. Oh, interesting. Looks like I have, all right, I'm going to have to, let me see if I can try to end gracefully. I think I will choose to end with the story of a woman named Kim Martin. Somebody asked, is 7 years long enough to hold on to the data? There's a guy, you know, a social movement is becoming a revolution when artists and musicians show up. So there's a doctor who used to work for Deloitte and then for AMIA, the informatics organization, named Ross Martin, who has a garage band, and they recorded my slogan, "Give me my damn data," and they made a music video of it, 3-minute music video. One for the doctor, two for the nurse. He's saying they're trying to treat me so to make me feel worse. Give me my damn data. Great song. They got Todd Park from Washington, D.C. in there, all kinds of people. Well, a little known fact is that a month after that video was recorded, Ross's wife, Kim, she had lymphoma in 1983, and she got heavy radiation. Just after that video, she learned she had cancer again, and the docs needed to know how much radiation she'd had. The records had been discarded because everybody, well, they'd waited the 7 years, right? Fortunately, way back then, she was a super engaged e-patient, though the word didn't exist yet. So she had the records, all right? So it would be natural if you figure, well, what good could patients do with this? To think we'll just throw out the information. But my motto, please, is let patients help, right? So that's it. Thank you so much. And I'm so inspired by all the things you're doing. Let's just keep working together.